Hello everybody, Ben Mays with Williams Soaring Center. I was just taking the time here with this beautiful windy day, waiting on the rain for the week, and was looking back through some of our archived webinars and stumbled across Pete Alexander's talk from this January 2022, where he talked about dissecting the sky and reading energy lines, had some cool talks on the wave flying, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to get this uploaded and shared off to everybody before our wave season's over. We got about another month, and then we'll start seeing some normal convergence soaring. So it's a great presentation. Pete's a well-accomplished glider pilot, 30 years of soaring. He's been to the competitions all over the country, competed at the world level, and just tons of great knowledge, beautiful soaring pictures from everywhere from New Zealand to his big focus on the Mendocino Mountain range here in Williams. So I hope you all enjoy. It's about an hour-and-a-half long video, and if you make it to the end, please like and subscribe, and we'll post more videos as they come available. Welcome everybody to the 2022 VSA Winter Webinar Series. We are pleased to have Mr. Pete Alexander as our first speaker on topic, and Pete will be sharing with us his version of dissecting the sky, reading energy lines, and with a focus more on the Mendocino Mountain range out of Northern California here, flying out of Williams. So, Pete.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everybody. Please, by all means, ask questions. All questions are good, especially for the newer people in our audience this evening. And this will be a little difficult because this is more of an interactive kind of thing usually, but just stop me and I'll try to explain what I think I'm seeing or what I think is going on. So here's the agenda. We'll talk about my background real quick because some people have asked in the past. Talk about going out to the Mendocinos. We'll do a lot of dissecting in the sky of convergence days, wave days, even thermal days out of Williams. Along the way, a bunch of tactics and tips, some training ideas towards the end. And then at the end of this, obviously, we want to seeking way more knowledge. And I'll give you a bunch of ideas about that. As Ben said, I do have some built-in places for questions, but I don't want to get farther than a slide or two ahead because we'll move fairly quick, and who knows, I might forget the real answer by then. Okay. So this is me when I was 15. And for the younger people in the audience, this is what's called a Schweitzer 233. You should all go find one and fly one so you know how lucky you are today. I've been flying, I flew out of sky sailing, started my career. It's no longer there. Been flying for over 40 odd years. I was a full-time CFI for a little over 5.5 years while I was in college. That's how I made my way through college. Flown a bunch of different places across the US and Europe, and flown a huge pilot contest. Slowly I'm figuring it all out. So towing to the Mendocinos. For all the people, most of you guys know it's a pretty long tow. It's like 15 minutes. We can start at Williams, you see in the bottom right corner of the W1SC. And on the way out, I'm always looking for places I might need to land if I screw the day up. Cook's is actually one of my favorites, but you need to make sure that there's not a pile of equipment or hay bales on it, which happens on and off. Charters is good, but it's narrow. I wouldn't land there unless I had a 15-meter glider. 20-meter gliders have gone in there, but you got to be very straight because there's vineyards or trees, I forget which one, along the sides. And then one of my favorites is antelope. But one of the challenges of antelope, it sits down in a valley a little bit with high hills around it, which is fine, but you need to really think about what you're going to do to land there. I've thankfully never landed there, but I've started my motor over there quite a bit. Also, north of Charters and northwest of Cooks, there's a bunch of great fields, but these fields aren't all usable all year round because sometimes they have high crops and sometimes they're flooded, but they are a very good alternative. All these little red X's are all the places I've towed this last year or so. My goal is always to get off as low as I can, but then not take a second tow or run my motor. This year I was successful. But the thing is, you want to fly the soaring you have, not the soaring you want. And continuing west, we come out to Antelope. And all the way out, I'm thinking about where I might land. Bear Valley is a great place, but it is a road. You need to decide if that's a good place or if you want to land next to the road in the fields. I actually prefer Indian or Antelope. Bear Valley only in a pinch if I screwed up. But so all the way out until I'm thinking about land outs. Where am I going to go in case something doesn't work the way I expect that day? Also, what's the wind doing? Because it will change as you get into the mountains. It will change as you come out of the mountains. Do you have any developing clouds? Any spinners? Anybody climbing? And you want to keep an eye on them to make sure they're really climbing. Sometimes they're just boring holes in the sky. And I listen to the radio quite a bit, trying to decide where to go. Usually there's enough chatter on the radio what's going on. And usually the tow pilot is a pretty good idea unless you're the very first person out there. And again, all the X's are from this year of all the places I've towed. This is not Williams. This is Czech Republic during the Worlds. They had about a dozen tow planes going. You can find 4 if you look careful in this picture. But one of the key things is it's way cheaper in time and your pocketbook to tow 500 feet higher, especially if you're going out to the hills. That 500 can make a huge difference in being stuck all day or for a way long time or landing at Antelope or Indian. You make a mistake. And the important thing is to fly the soaring you have, not the soaring you want. You need to make sure the situation you have is the right situation for the soaring, not what happened 10 minutes earlier or 15 minutes later, because the Mendos will cycle in such a way that you can't believe that the guy ahead of you got off and the guy behind you got off in a way, but you didn't. So you need to make sure you're actually towing to a place you have 2-3 options, not just one option. Because you only have one option that doesn't work, you're probably headed back. And when you look at the round trip, that means you're probably not going to get a tow for at least an hour. So 500 feet is cheap in time and money. Any questions out there? It's silence. Moving along. So one of the biggest things about dissecting the sky is looking up and looking out. If you take away nothing from tonight, that's the key thing, is get your head out of the cockpit. That's the biggest thing, next to where the wind's coming from, but get your head out of the cockpit. You can't see anything looking into the cockpit. So when I first flew with Brian Spreckley, one of the UK coaches, I just thought I was pretty good about spending my time in the cockpit. And turns out he decided to time me a couple of times. And I was like about 20 seconds per minute in the cockpit. We have all these beautiful instruments these days. And one of his big points is kind of subtle but important, was you want to use your instruments to back up your thinking, not to be your thinking. And it takes a while to get your thinking twisted around like that. But once you do, you find out all the real knowledge is outside, and you want to spend all of your time looking outside and have your instruments back up what you're thinking. This is on the ridge back in Mifflin. This is Rick Inderbo in the back seat, me in the front during the Nationals in 2018. We're running the ridge at warp speed. The mountain we're on top of is jacks. And so, yes, keep your head out of the cockpit no more than 10 seconds. Practice this. It takes a little work to do well. As all I can say is look up and look out. That's where all the soaring is. That's where all the traffic is. That's where all the fun is. No fun inside the cockpit. So look at the sky. There's a bunch of things I think about when I'm looking at the sky. First, this picture, by the way, is out of Uvalde during the Worlds. Look up and look out. You'll hear that throughout this evening. Look for the changing fabric and the texture of the clouds, because that's where you're going to find the movement. Wind direction, of course, is our speed pitch, which is, again, part of the movement, a part of the action you can see. And we're going to show you a bunch of pictures about that to kind of reinforce that thinking. The color changes. Usually the darker part of the cloud is better, but not always. Use the shadows on the ground to provide you a path to work your way underneath the cloud street. Where's the sun? We'll talk about it in a little more detail, but thermals tend to follow the sun as the day goes by, especially later in the day, and especially when you're not very high. Are the cloud tops popping? If they are, there's a high likelihood you're going to get thunderstorms at some point in the day. Hazy versus clear air, we'll have some examples of that, where the lift is, where to find it. And then haze domes. I don't have any pictures of haze domes because they're extremely hard to take a picture of. But if you do have good sunglasses, Maui gyms I fly with, you can actually see them. I've seen them on the Mendos and most blue days in the West. And then finally, do you have any wrinkles? So wrinkles, what do wrinkles mean? Back to Mifflin again with this photo. So the wrinkles I'm always looking for are basically changes. What is changing through the day? And sometimes they're subtle, sometimes they're drastic, but you want to keep your eye out for things changing. The wind direction, the wind speed, break in the cloud street. If there's a break in the cloud street, might not be a big deal, but that might be a huge deal depending on what kind of break it is. Is there spread out coming? As you can see in this photo across the valley, there is quite a bit of spread out. So you want to make sure you don't get yourself disconnected from the lift. You want to make sure you don't get too low, because once you do, if you notice, there's no sun on the ground barely. And that little place where there is sun on the ground across the valley on that road is probably the best place to look if you got stuck or if you got disconnected. Approaching cirrus or front, we'll talk about that. That will tend to drastically change your day. Is there rain? Got a thunderstorm coming? Or is there a wave? All these things can change the soaring you have and or the final glide you might be trying to plan. So let's talk about wave soaring. All this, we got many flavors of wave to look at. First off, we have this. As this is New Zealand looking northwest, they call this a northwest arch. It's amazing when the wave works like this. You know, we all know what we need to make a wave. We need a mountain, a trigger. We need some wind that's increasing with altitude, which hopefully doesn't come off the trigger more than 45, 60 degrees. And then we need a wind gradient going all the way up. The wave we're going to talk about today is always from a west wind wave with an approaching front. So this is Reno. The Sierra wave is one of the best I've ever flown anywhere on the planet. This is at Reno looking south from the Reno weather office. The thing is, you want to look at this cloud and a couple things. The winds are right to left. You'll see the little rotary bits right now, the little puffies on the right edge. Those are rotary things. You'll see the Lenny stack over the top. And I want you to, you'll see actually to the left side of the wave, there's actually the secondary. You'll see a little rotary Q step on the left side of the picture. That's where secondary is. But I want you to watch how the fabric, the feeling of this cloud changes. You can see this wave go all the way from Reno all the way into Minden. So here we go. It's about a 30-second loop. So you can see the rotor on the right side. It continues. The winds are right to left. You can see the rotor on the left side of the secondary. It continues. And then just notice how the lenticular changes as the wind changes and as the humidity in the air changes. It's pretty steady. It doesn't move much, but it does move. As the day gets longer, you still see rotors to the left on the secondary. It's drying up. And then kind of in the middle right edge, you can see the cap cloud. And then you can see the whole thing kind of reform one more time before sunset. So that's a rocking wave. We occasionally see that here, flying out of Williams. It's fairly rare, but once or twice a year, you'll see a really good wave setup. It has all the classic stuff happening. However, a lot of times you get wave, we don't have classic stuff happening. This is New Zealand again. It's the same place we saw that rocking northwest arch, but this time it's a lot more subtle. And all the brown stuff you see in the air is actually smoke from Australia during the bushfires when I was there. But the real interesting thing is, if you notice, where does the up part of the wave start? Right ahead of the queue. It's out a little bit. So you got to figure out a way to climb up the face of the queue or climb up high enough and pop out in front of it high enough to get into the main of the wave. The Kiwis don't think it's very sporting to tow into the wave. They don't like to tow much over 2,000 feet. just because that's just not the way they do wave soaring. The other advantage they have is that all their wave flying's done in their summer. But since they're in the middle of the ocean, there's always a west wind of some kind blowing in general. So the wave tends to work every day. Okay. I wish somebody would ask you a question. All right. What makes the wave work out of Williams? I kind of already told you. It's the front. So here's a classic wave day out of Williams, the front coming. Wind is, of course, left to right. You can see all the little, on the middle left sides, all the little wave bar holes from the Lennies. And if you go to the right of the, you go to the right towards, in the photo towards Nevada, you can see all the waves there, all the different wave bars across. Now, one of the key things to realize is that we always think about the wave straight as your arm. Well, actually, it's very rarely straight. It's always got wiggles and jiggles in it. We tend to have some pretty long waves, but a lot of times we have pretty small waves, little sections that'll work. So you want to keep your, your mind open to the fact that you can find these little hot spots, and sometimes the little hot spots are a place to sit. So there we go. There's a classic prefrontal wave coming in. Back to Minden. Now, one thing with the prefrontal wave coming, there's a lot of moisture that's coming. And you got to be really, really careful that you don't get stuck on top or get stuck in the middle of a cloud. Minden's in the middle. We're looking north. You can see little breaks, little wave bars working their way north, northwest, kind of north and sliding left a little bit. This was a wave day where the wave was working pretty good. You can see the Lenny on top. But if you notice, Lennies aren't super defined. They're kind of fuzzy, which is fine. But you got to be really careful because, as you can see, the moisture from the left side of the picture kind of stops in the middle of the valley. At times it stopped, and at times it went all the way through over this 4-hour flight I had. So we didn't go too far. You can see this very similar thing happen in the wave out of Williams up on Goat. And it looks like this. So we're just east of Goat. This was in this last fall. And there's a couple super important things here. One, if you notice the clouds are going, they're pretty wide. They're sliding from, the right side of the picture all the way to the left. If you notice, they're pretty flat. There's not a lot of options here if the wave changes either moisture or lift. But there are a bunch of wave bars you can use to get out of here safely. But this was the point. I stuck around just long enough to take these pictures and leave because the wave is starting to get really soft and funky. And a lot of times when the moisture starts coming in, it starts to get very pulsy. And you don't want to fall into these clouds because these clouds are about 6,000 feet deep this day. You don't want to fall in the clouds ever, but it's not going to be pretty. So where are the wave bars? First one's pretty simple to see. I see 4. But that was the wave bar I headed to. Then, and climbed back up a little bit. Then I went to the second wave bar, climbed up a little bit. I'm trying to work my way south to get me out of all this moisture because, again, the moisture is coming from the north, northwest. Then there's another wave bar here, and then here. I worked all of those, working my way south into Cape Valley. But this is something you got to be extremely careful of. You always want to have at least 2 escapes. In general, that in this case, it could be to the left, but I wasn't high enough to go to the left to guarantee I could get out, or work your way south. And this is a little bit uncomfortable, working my way south, trying to stay out of trouble. So be very careful.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Because I was nervous just looking at this picture. So how are you identifying those 4 wave bars? I mean, I see where you're pointing.
Yeah.
But...
So I'd flown those 4 to get here.
Okay.
So coming up, the one to the right, number 4. I'm pretty sure that was in the north end of Bear Valley. Number 3 was in the south end of Bear Valley, and then number 2 is over Indian Valley Reservoir. So these are, I probably used 3, 4, and 1 to get here. And so it just, as I was going north, you could see that the whole day was filling in. And this is as far as I wanted to go. And I went a little farther. Then what happened was that Clear Lake's on the right. As I was going farther, the wave bar for number 1, that hole as you come this way started to fill in. So I tend to go north a little, I tend to go a direction a little bit when it's really moist. And then I do a 90-degree turn and look back over my shoulder where I came from to see how that looks. The difficulty was we weren't getting really high. So sometimes you get super high and just, you can run, in this case, to the left, which would be east. But this was about as high as I could get. And the lift rate started to drop quite a bit. It went from 3, 4 knots down to 1, 2. And it's partly because the wave was shifting, because the waves, it's always shifting as the wind and wind direction changes and the moisture changes. But it was shifting pretty hard. And I turned around and started going south.
And Pete.
Yeah.
You have a pretty good, you got your 20 something knots or so. So with, people who aren't super familiar, you look at that bar and you go, yeah, it's pretty narrow, or it's looking like you're filling in, you're over clouds. You have Clear Valley to the left, on a pretty easy glide over those clouds if you need to get out too, right?
Yeah, it made me nervous though, Ben, because of how wide these clouds were and how relatively, I didn't feel super high above it. I didn't feel like that was my number 2 idea if things went bad. I didn't like, if you look how wide all this is, it wasn't looking good, and you're going to hit some lift and sink along the way, and you don't know which one's first. So I turned around at this point right after this photo and got to where number 1 was, climbed up, and then they kept moving south because I didn't like how it was all filling in.
Right.
Any other questions?
Chris Reagan asked if Clear Lake was on left. No, Clear Lake, so this is looking south, so Clear Lake would be on the top right corner, would be Clear Lake, and then to the left off the wingtip is the valley pointing back. Basically, the wingtip's pointing at Williams, right?
Yeah, it's behind Williams. The Williams behind the wingtip. It does look like water out there, but that's not. I can tell you the water's to the right.
Cool.
Got it. Right. Okay. Here we go. This is Bear Valley, the north end of Bear Valley. It's one of my favorite spots. It seems to be a hot spot. And if you notice in the picture, we're looking north. So the right wingtip is pointing north. In the hills there, you'll see this little fire trail. Don't know why. Fire trail, the fire break is a good place. Winds left to right. Right up the middle of the picture where the wingtip is pointing, just ahead in the broken spot, that's north end of Bear Valley onto Indian, and it's a pretty good wave bar all the way up. Then the wave bar to your left, the circle underneath the pointy end of the wind arrow, that is tucked in behind Goat. And again, this is kind of classic wave out of Williams where you don't get these huge, smooth, beautiful lennies. You get this kind of soft cotton candy look. I think I went to 15,000 feet right here without working too terribly hard. So don't let the non-classic wave clouds fool you. We have a lot of wave days just like this out of Williams. Cape Valley, looking south. Now, Cape is one of the magic spots because everything lines up good. You got a good trigger to your right of the photo, and you got a fairly okay drop. Now, one of the things that's super important back to keeping your eyes outside of the cockpit is if you're not looking, you're not going to see the little nuances of things. Usually where you get the rotary bits is usually where the better wave lift is. Not always, mind you, but usually. But those are very subtle photos. But if you're not looking outside a lot, you're going to miss them. You're not going to be able to know where the hot spot of the wave is. Cape is one of the coolest places. The cool thing is Cape is south of most of the moisture early in the day, and it tends to be a beautiful trigger that does this. And the wave runs all the way down, which is right in the middle of the photo. But then you'll see that, this picture, this is about 5 minutes later, 8 minutes later from the previous photo, and there's rotary bits, but there's not rotary bits somewhere else. You also notice that the Lenny here, it's not super stacked up, but it's a Lenny, and it's got a lot of, ripples through it. And that just shows you, the kind of the atmosphere isn't perfect. And also because if you notice on the right side of the photo, the hills aren't perfectly smooth. So you get a bunch of gaps and things along the way. But this wave bar worked really good all the way to the bottom of the valley. Also on the left side of the photo, behind this lenticular, you'll see another little bits and pieces wave bar. The secondary off the east side of Cape Valley works pretty well. But again, it's very subtle. It doesn't have that wave look, but it's working fine. I worked it back up when I came back north. Usually you can work the wave on and off all the way down to Highway 80 and back on days that look like this. Another view of Cape Valley. We're right at the bottom of the photo is Highway 20, so we're sitting right over Three Sisters. But just another look. And again, you see kind of Lenny rotors all the way south towards Cape Valley. It's not a perfect look, but again, this wave worked all the way down to Highway 80. The point being is I don't want people to think you have to look exactly perfect textbook to have a wave soaring day. You don't. Most days have some version of this. Just a more up close look at the Lenny is working pretty good. And you can see in this case, the rotary a little bit more softer, not quite as pronounced, but if you're looking outside watching these things, you can see them change. And again, another view going south, Cape A's to the right. These things you go, those aren't rotary bits. And you go, yeah, they are. If you notice on the left side of the photo, this lenticular looks kind of nondescript, soft, not very good. Right, it wasn't. But here we are cruising 80 knots just along the edge of the rotary bits. And that Lenny stack you see in the middle of the picture, that Lenny stack was just smoking. And it should because it looked really good. Now, for your local guys out of Williams, there's something special about the Casino Turnpoint area. The Casino Turnpoint just to the right of the Lenny stack. Sometimes it's right over Casino. Sometimes it's to the right of it, the west of it, east of it. But it seems like the world gets into sync right around Casino. That guy there was working at 10 knots. And back here I was barely getting a knot of lift. So it is totally incredible how when the world gets in sync just the right way. And also you can see up on the right side, kind of middle right side, the Lenny gets better. There's a wave right in front of the good Lenny stack in the middle of the photo, and then upwind at the other Lenny stack, and the other Lenny went all the way down to Highway 80. So hopped upwind and went south I went. All right, transitioning wave bars. I had to go to New Zealand to get this knowledge. So this is a super important piece of knowledge for you guys. My light blue track was on the way out going north, and the darker blues coming south. You have the Goat on the Goat Mountain Complex on the left side. You have Snow and St. John. The wind arrows, as you can see. And the whole idea is to maximize your time in lift and minimize your time in sink. So there's two important points here, super important. Point one is when you're making a transition going downwind, ideally you want to make it with the wind directly at your back. That way you're going to get into the lift as quick as possible. Along with that, point two is you want to make these transitions hopefully you want to move down the wave a ways until you get just a little bit of lift. Not a lot, not little, but not super strong. Because if it's super strong, you get super strong sink. So you want to work your way to where you got maybe a knot up instead of 8 knots, and then transition directly with the wind at your back. And then as soon as you start getting any lift, turn back into the wind. Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to just keep wait until the vario pegs? Anybody?
By the time you turn, it'll be too late.
Too late? Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
You'll be too late. And it's better to be too early and then adjust your crab than to be too late as you blow yourself out the back of the wave. It can be, you know, spectacular doing that. And it's really cool to see somebody do it ahead of you. You don't want to do it. As soon as you start getting any lift, turn right back into the wind and then adjust your crab accordingly, wiggle and jiggle. You notice on the way up north, the bigger yellow arrow, I slid a little this way, and that was all due to what the clouds are doing, what I thought was right. And then coming back southbound, the dark blue line, a little bit farther to the right of the photo, which is the east. And that, again, had to do with what I was seeing in the clouds in the sky. And I don't know how high I was, but if you notice, the colors got darker, and the darker the color, the higher I got. So the key, you know, make all your transitions and least amount of lift you can bear. Turn as quick as you start hit and lift, and wiggle and jiggle as you need. It's going to move around. And the move around has a lot to do with the fact that if you look to the left side of the photo, the terrain's changing. It's not a straight, perfect, pretty hunk of terrain. And that's what happens sometimes. Okay, we're coming south from Berryessa Dam. Berryessa Dam on this one is to the left of the left side of the photo. You see the water. Now, this is kind of a good example where the wave's working, but it's not working great. And about where does it look to you, somebody, please, somebody, does it look like the wave's going to start getting better? Anybody? Anybody? Or does it never get better? Silence falls across the audience.
It looks like up there on the right-hand side, is the rotor has a really strong arch to it. So I would guess there.
Yeah, it's about the middle. If you notice in the middle of the photo, you get, it's about in the middle where you get those Q-looking things that have a little more Q structure. And you look at the Lennies, they have a little bit more structure and definition, is where the wave gets better. Where, let's say on the bottom half of the photo, you go middle, then go down towards the instrument panel, the wave is working here, but it's a little soft, which is fine. But you're not going to, the point is to get your mind set up to go, where do I expect to lift? Where do I expect less lift? So that you don't get all panicky. And in this case, it's like, okay, we're coming through here, working north. Partly it's because where the dam is, there's a big gap in the hills. That makes sense because the wave won't work so good. But as you get away from the influence of the gap into the middle of the photo is where the wave picks up again. And picks up again, meaning from 1 knot to 5 or 6 or 7 or something.
Yeah, Pete, this is Kemp. So one of the things I've noticed is that stack height of the lenticular directly correlates with the strength of the climb.
That's a great point, Kemp. That's an awesome point. And that kind of goes back to the higher the stack, the better the definition of a cloud, be it a wave cloud, a cumulus cloud, usually says there's better lift. That's a really good point.
Would you mind, Pete, just stepping back one slide?
Sure. This one?
It's thinking.
Yeah. So one thing I'll make a comment on here is that notice how Pete's track it kind of parallels, because wave parallels the drop off of the terrain. So notice exactly right there where the short yellow arrow is and the long yellow arrow is, because that terrain there kind of comes to the east a little bit. That's also the wave bar, the wave lift tends to then move with that, right? Because on the backside of the ridge, it needs to drop a certain amount. And so because of that terrain there, it's shifted to the east, so therefore the lift shifts to the east.
Yeah, the other thing, thanks, Kemp. Along with that is that if you notice where all the wind arrows are and there's light blue, it was working okay. It wasn't working great. And so I finally decided it's time to shift off and get into the area that the way Kemp just described it. So the other thing is it does jiggle and wiggle around. Anything else, Kemp?
No, that was it. I just wanted to catch that.
There's a question asking, is this the secondary? No, that would be the primary there, right? That you're in?
I would guess this is the primary. Now, does it really matter? and non-snarkiness, it doesn't really matter. The thing is that the part from the yellow arrows above, it might be the secondary off snow that's upwind of what's on the left side of the picture.
Right. I think the question probably comes from, you were referring to drop back down, you know, and usually you talk about wave transitions. Most times we talk about going upwind, right? Whenever we're going to transition. So you're saying, hey, slide out. It just wasn't working well. So you turned downwind until it worked okay, turned back up to the wind and got in another section of the wave. And that's part of this isolated thing that we have to deal with.
Yeah. It could have been, I don't remember what it looked like. The big message I was trying to convey in this slide was the whole transition thing and the technique to do it. Because nobody had told me that, so I flew a bunch of wave flying in New Zealand.
And Pete, now that we're back to this picture, on that, as you're moving north, and then you make that hard transition to the right, to the east, is that because you really weren't finding anything, and then that's where you use that technique of heading east till you started seeing some lift and then hard back north? Yeah, it wasn't working really good, because if you notice, there's right before I make that hard transition, there's kind of a kinkle and a winkle in it, a little left and a right. And this is something where a lot of times where I think the wave should be, it's not. And so the light blue line is, this is a good idea. And then if you look at my dark blue line at the bottom of this slide, I went back to the light blue line because it wasn't working as good as I thought. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it going north, it was really clear that I needed to be farther to the east. It was black and white clear. But going, as I got farther south again, it was like, oops, I need to be farther to the west, which is the left side. And so, was part of that decision based on kind of what Kempton was saying, is what you're seeing in terrain-wise as well, or how did you decide that direction? It's a combination of terrain and it's a combination of clouds. Because part of the problem is, all of the Mendocinos are lumpy. There's not really much. I mean, there's spots where, like behind St. John's, it's pretty clear what the air does. Down Cape Valley, it's lumpy, but it's pretty straight, and there's a good drop off. Because the big thing is, back to Kim's point, is you need the drop off to be the trigger of the wave, because that's what's going to do it. And that's why Minden is so good. Is a drop off on the east side of the Sierras is really clean and deep. It's about 6,000 feet. Yeah. So it's a drop off that kicks everything off, but things aren't always that neat when you have lumpy mountains like the Mendocinos. And you'll notice, if you look at any of my flights from last fall and any of my wave flights, I tend to find little hot spots and stay there until I get about 10,000 feet. Because usually about 8, 9, 10 is where the wave seems to sync up and get going into more of a linear straight thing. Makes sense.
Cool.
All right, we're back to this.
I was being a bad moderator, but is this the secondary question? Wasn't this photo here?
I don't know. I think I'd say that this is the primary coming off the hills right to my left.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's how I look at it. And again, I kind of asked the question of why does it matter? And the reason being is that the clouds are the clouds, the lift is the lift. Do you really care if it's the first, second, or third? Now, we do know as you get to the second and third, they're usually less strong. So this is probably the first. But if you look at the hills to the left of me, like look at a high top view, it's kind of lumpy, but you can see how there can be multiple triggers. I just try to fly in the best air I can find. I don't know if that helps. All right, back to this one. So we mentioned before that when the west wind wave is working out of Williams, we have a front coming. And all that moisture, there it is. Minden has the same problem. It's a west wind wave with the front coming. You need to be super duper careful that you don't fly so far away and fly yourself back into a situation you don't have a good landing spot. And this is one of those days. So same place, a little farther up the valley. If you notice on the right side of the photo, we're in a little bit better Lenny's, but not great. But however, And one of the key points to this photo is here we are at just under 12,000 feet. We're doing 100 knots indicated, and we're going up 100 feet a minute. We're going up 1 knot. And the sky doesn't look great. We go, there's wave. And I was right in the hot spot, happy spot where there was wave. So the thing is that there's a lot of energy in the sky out there. It might not be ripping, cool, pretty, but a lot of times it doesn't matter because the system's working. The other point is, so what is the ideal lift band? In this case, my goal is to get back to Williams before I got rained on. And the front is moving a lot quicker than I thought it was. I was coming up from Highway 80. But there's not much reason. If you look on my fantastic figure on the left side, the top of it, the figure goes to about where the cues are, or the lineas. And the bottom is it kind of goes to the top of the cues. And this is kind of the place I wanted to be so I could move as quick as I could going northbound. The other thing is, if you notice on the ClearNav Vario, it's the Vario on the left, the winds are at 209 at 41. So my true airspeed is up over 160 or something, trying to get home before it started to rain. And it rained.
Pete, John raised his hand. John, you want to?
Oh, John.
Hey there. I just had a comment because I was out there with Pete that day. And this was an interesting one because Pete shellacked me. And this I-80 and back, Pete gained, I looked at the trace after it, something like 30 or 40 miles on me. How'd he do it? Well, I was up at 17.5 thinking, oh boy, I want to stay high. But of course, the strongest part of the wave was down where Pete was. So if you want to make some distance, figure out where the wave is strongest and go fast rather than always be as high as you can. Duh. Well, thanks for the lesson, Pete.
You're welcome, John. But there are times to do what John did. And if, for example, if we're going to keep going south, because we both turned around Highway 80, you'd want to be at 17,500 feet before you made your jump. In this case, like I said, I'm just trying to go home. Anything else? Anybody? Questions? This is me chasing Ben around a few years ago. So that concludes our wave section of this thing. We're going to move on to something different, unless there's a question or two or three. Doesn't look like it. All right.
Hey, Pete, I have a question.
Okay.
Why is Ben higher than you?
Because I was feeling sorry for Ben this day.
Oh, okay, just making sure.
Yeah, but it is, beyond that, it is an interesting point. We're in wave. If you look underneath us, those little soft cotton candy clouds, you're going, what do you mean you're in wave? It wasn't going super high. It wasn't super strong, but here we are around 12,000 feet. So keep your mind open to wild stuff. And if you're nice to me, I'll let you climb higher than me. All right, convergence. Top of the Mendos looking north just past sheet iron. And if you notice, this kind of classic summertime convergence. Cleanish air to the left, dirtiest air to the right. I kind of view convergence is this kind of greenish line is showing you've got two air masses smacking into each other. And where they smack into each other is where you end up with the thermals. And that's what we have, this tension between the air mass coming from the ocean and the air mass out in Sacramento Valley, Williams to the right, all summer long. And that's what makes some amazing soaring that'll take you all the way up to Shasta. Here's another example. This is out in the middle of the valley. We are right near charters. And this is super important because on the right side, what do we see in this photo compared to the left side?
Very clear air.
That's a very good.
Yeah. So on the right side, super clear. Oops, sorry about that. And on the left side, a little bit dirty. Now we get this a lot of times in the spring and summer where the convergence line comes all the way off of the Mendocinos. Now, sometimes it's right where the dirty clean meet. A lot of times it's into the dirt a little bit. And if you look at the cues above, it is a little bit into the dirt a little bit before you get a really good cue. Because the clean air, the marine air, has scrubbed all the, kind of bulldozer all of the thermals. and you got to get to the dirty air before you start getting the bulldozer that's tossing off good Q again, good thermals again.
Hey, Pete.
Yeah.
Also in this picture is a really good example. Looking down about a quarter of the way up on the right side, you see a dust plume moving right to left. And then in the dirty air, you see it moving in a different direction, oftentimes from towards us and then away. So it's also a place where there's a wind shift taking place.
Very good point, whoever that was. Very good. So yeah. And so the other good point is that you have all these tractors. I'm pretty sure that all these tractors down work in the fields and the trees, the almond orchard. So they're also a super good thing to keep your eyes out, which is a point I made earlier, is what's the wind doing? And it's where that wind shift is where the thermals will be.
Hey, Pete.
Anything else?
Yes, Pete.
Benjamin.
It is Ben. The other thing that I think is really important for people that are just getting into convergence is really understanding, and maybe you hit this in another slide, but understanding that most of the time you have to know, is the convergence working? Because if it is, it's convergence or nothing, right?
Right.
Not 100% nothing, but more or less you got to be in the line, and all other things, you know, normal clouds, other clouds that aren't in the convergence line might look okay, but they're not going to work.
Yeah, that's a great lead in, Ben. So sometimes you have this kind of jumbled up mess. This is right above sheet iron looking north. And so there's a couple important things. One, the point that Ben just made, super important. Is any of this mess working? It turns out some of this mess is working. And the piece of the mess that was working in this case is that little piece right in the middle. There's this little, is that a Q looking thing? And if you're out looking outside, you can tell there's action going on there. All this other stuff's jumbled up mess until you get to the Q that's in the middle of the kind of middle left. There's a little, kind of get the middle and you go left, you start to see a little baby cloud streak is where it's working really well. Here's a closer view of when it's working really well. But you got to make sure you're high enough to get there. There's another super key thing here besides the winds left to right. You look to the right, most of the clouds are pretty low on the hills. So if you miss the convergence when you're in the middle of the Mendocinos, your choices on this day were very limited.
Eric, this should be very familiar looking to you.
Kempton.
It is, in fact.
So there are ways to escape to the right, but you got to be very selective and willing to get pretty freaking low. You're probably not going to be able to escape to the left because of the mountains in the way and where your places to land are. So you need to be freaking sure that you stay up. And if you do get in trouble, you have a notch in the hills that you feel comfortable going down. And if you do not chase any of the real experienced people on days like this, unless you're totally comfortable with because you get yourself in really deep trouble quick. So once we got to the good Q and around the corner again, this thing just raged from that good Q all the way to yellow. It was really cool. It was just a magic highway, but you need to be super careful. All right, I'm showing you this picture because I made a huge mistake on this day. Now, this is looking south. The gold mines are underneath the wingtip, and you can maybe see Berryessa in the middle of the photo. Now, of course, you have convergence. You have winds coming from both directions, left and right. The unique thing about this, and this is the first time I've ever seen this flying out of Williams, is if you notice where the notch is, that's obviously where the happy spot is, but it's coming from the east. Usually the east winds don't win. Usually it's the west winds that win, and that's why the notch is always on the west, or the step is always on the west. And this is just more of a case of flying eyes wide open. I followed the little, Q at my right wingtip. I went down and around, and it was getting lower and lower. And then I went due east because it's like, this ain't working. I can run out towards the valley, and I got into the notch. And it was like, oops, I've never seen it do this. But the point is, keep your eyes open and keep your mind open to the lift is a lift. It is where it is, not where you want it to be. Super important. It's easy to get your mind programmed. It's going to be this is what I'm going to do. And one of my sayings, actually one of the sayings from G was eyes wide open, eyes wide open. Don't assume.
Pete, what this is camp? What day was this? I've never seen this either.
It's last fall. Is September, October, Kemp?
That's amazing.
I know. That's why I put the photo in here. That's why I took the photo, because it kicked my butt. Yeah, I've never seen a east wind convergence like this.
Pete, question for you. I'm used to seeing and hearing about the marine push, and the marine air is going to have the moisture and be lower on the step, but it seems like you're saying things work the other way, that it's not really marine air.
Well, this is why I look at convergence. That's why the point I tried to make earlier, Dan, is in my mind, convergence are two air masses pushing on each other. And usually the marine side wins because it's the bigger push. And that's like 99% of the time. And like Kim just said, this is the first time I've ever seen the valley winds do this. But one thing to know about flying out of Williams is that the marine air comes through Carquinez Strait, and it goes out a ways, it gets about Sacramento, then it bends right, which is what caused the southeast wind out of Williams a lot. So yeah, in general, the marine air wins, but this 1% of the time it didn't.
That's you can see the haziness right there, right to the left of the happy spot arrow. It is clearer to the left.
Yeah. So you see it clear to the left. Actually, you can see that haze line kind of between the clear air and the clouds. And if you keep going, if you go from the left side of the picture, looking at the haze line, dirty air, all the way across to the right side of the picture. And that's what confused me, because I was working the little wispy stuff on the right side. When I was going south, this step was not there. And the wind was pretty light, but there was like a 10-knot westerly wind. I go, okay, I'll go the west side. And then I didn't connect and got low, not super low, but I was like, and I go, I'm going to go out. I was headed to the cues in the left middle of the picture. I don't know how to do that, but the left middle picture is where I was headed. And then I turned around, and all of a sudden I got on the convergence lines, like, whoa. So never seen this before. I'm happy to hear you haven't seen it either, Kim.
Yeah, this is very impressive.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's why I have pictures there. All right, so here's another convergence day. The mountain underneath the wind thing is Mount St. John's, Stony Ford Reservoir. This is another case where it's kind of wispy. The convergence is working, but not great. One thing you got to keep in mind, that if the convergence is working, there's probably more than just you out there. So you don't want to hug the clouds too far. I'll tend to slide out pretty far off the line as I go around turns to make sure I don't have an abrupt thing. There's two very interesting things in this photo that you rarely see, but here's another super tip that came from you from Kiwi Land. And it involves the reservoir.
You can see the wind shadow, the lack of wind shadow.
Now there's a wind shadow right there.
Yeah,
super important.
You see the clear air coming through the middle of it. You can see it in Berryessa a lot with the convergence line, as you can really see the line on Lake Berryessa when you're going south.
Yeah. So what Ben's pointing out is on the left side of the lake, it's all ripply. Not a lot of ripply, but there's a texture to it. On the right side of the lake, there is nothing. It's glass smooth. So the convergence line actually went out to where the arrow is, right up the middle of the lake, and then bent around to the little wispies you see in the middle of the photo. And the thing to keep in mind is that, the atmosphere is lazy. It's going to figure out the easiest path that can do something. So you want to try to follow that path to the best ability you can. And that's that line it worked great. This is a classic. I've seen it in New Zealand a lot, but this is the first time I've seen it. I've seen it Berryessa, but the first time I see it on Stonyford. There's something else that's interesting in this picture. It's in the middle.
Wait, Lenny?
Yep. I eventually got into way and went to 12,000 feet. So I went around the corner, got a little farther that direction, and I didn't tuck in right behind St. John's, which is right above the question marks. But if you'll see, there's these little wispy rotary cues. And it was slightly upwind of the Lenny, and I got into the wave and went up to 12,000 feet, which is totally unexpected. Again, you fly the soaring you have, not the soaring you want. Any questions? So another convergence day. This is right on the edge of the valley. And this is later in the day when the convergence started to. The thing is you're not going to see these little subtle things unless you keep your eyeballs outside the glider. And all these little wispy bits, all the arrows are pointing at all the things that were active. But if you're not looking outside enough to see them being active, back to Ben's point a little bit ago, you wouldn't know where to put the glider. You would think you'd have to go all the way into the second arrow from the left, that good cue, before you got lift. And actually the little left arrow, the farthest left arrow, there's a little bit of wispiness there, and it was working really good right up to cloud base at 8 knots. So keep your head out.
Pete.
Yes.
One other thing, just pointing out, because these are things that, not just students, but, anyone who's starting to fly out there for the first time or trying to be successful, their first couple flights in their 24, just in Williams in general, everyone thinks about the wind and the sun and, what's going on in the grand scheme of things, but they try and stay in the middle of the convergence line. And almost every single picture, you're out in the blue on the west side. And maybe just underneath the wispies, right underneath, but you're always on the west third of the cloud line. There's almost never that the east side of any of these streets are going to work. You're almost always riding that west edge of any convergence line you can, right? With the exception of that picture, there's sometimes, the 2 or 3% that you want to stay on the east and you got to fly the day, but west is best when you're flying the west coast, right?
It's usually the west side is usually the windward side, and it's usually the sunny side. The key is the wind, because you need the thing is that the wind from the west is what's driving the convergence. And the other thing is the convergence. If you notice, this convergence line actually started to the left of me, out or either Walker Ridge or Goat. So it just keeps marching all day. Sometimes very slowly, sometimes very quickly, sometimes it doesn't. But Ben's point is super important. West is best. The point is the windward side, in case you ever go fly down in the southern hemisphere.
You can always head east if you've gone too far west because you're downwind, right?
Yeah, so that's a good point, Mike. In general, you want to work on the windward side and be too far upwind than to be on the downwind side, because you have a lot more higher penalty of altitude loss if you do end up too far downwind. So continuing on the kind of that west is best idea, this is Bear Valley right ahead of the wingtip. So the big brown stuff. And then looking west, the little gap in the hills is where 20 goes through. But this happens pretty much every day in the summer, is that the winds come up off Clear Lake. Clear Lake's kind of the bottom left corner behind us. And the wind pushes the convergence to the east. And you can kind of see it with the cloud shadows. So that whole thing, this lift line's working great, but it's bending off to the left to stay in the right place. Clouds are good. Another rule of thumb, clouds are good, blue is bad, unless it's bad clouds. But generally speaking, clouds are good, blue is bad, and all these wispy things just left and moving into the center. As long as those are live, meaning they're moving, the convergence is going to be good. If not, you got to keep moving to get to the part of the clouds that are moving again.
Yep. Pete, one more thing is, back to circle back around to where do you tow on the Mendos? You almost always, there's a lot of people you'll see pop off early, and guys, the experienced guys are popping off and gliding in, but every single one of them is contacting almost first lift on the west edge of the cloud line too. So tow out to the west, almost in the blue, because you can always get back. But if you don't get that first climb because you think you're in a little bit of poppy lift on the east side and get blown out of it, you're not going to be willing to dive into Goat Mountain to go climb out, or not willing and shouldn't probably. But
yeah, you shouldn't. It's an important point, because you start to get into these clouds just as you get to Three Sisters, let's say, but you got to wait until you got a really good climb. Now, it doesn't mean you won't get a climb at Three Sisters. I get climbs all the time between Three Sisters and northwest of Antelope, but you got to make sure, one, it is a real climb, and two, if you're wrong, you have enough altitude to go find another one. I try to have 2 or 3 choices before I get off tote. So super important. You got to come farther west than you want a lot of times. But then you can see somebody groveling down low. That's kind of fun. Or my favorite is to start my motor over their head at Antelope. Thermaling. So we're going to talk about a few tips first. This photo, by the way, is Concordia. It's out of Hobbs during Nationals a few years back. The simple thing is stay in the lift. And we'll talk a little bit about technique here, but there's all these people when I first started flying a G, I was trying to explain this elaborate thing, and he kept giving me this dead look at me, and this went on for a couple minutes. And he says, it's simple, Pete, or Peter, stay in the lift. So you need to figure out how to stay in the lift. Because there's not really there's a couple techniques, which we don't want to get into here because I can't draw pictures, but stay in the lift, which means engage the thermal at a 40 to 45 degree bank. We'll talk about why that's important more in a moment. You got to fly constant speed, constant bank. If you can't fly that, it don't matter where the lift is because you'll keep flying out of it. There's exceptions like Ben, when I flew with Ben a few years back, where the glider is totally kittywampus crazy and we're going up like a rocket ship, but constant speed, constant bank, coordinated. When you're making adjustments, small, easy ones, you want to be careful because if you take too big of bites and you're wrong, you'll no longer be going up, and that could be very, very disappointing. All movement should be smooth, flowing like water. 3 reasons. 1, if you're moving the glider around like crazy, you're making a lot of drag. 2, you can't feel the air, what it's telling you, and the thermal will talk to you. And 3, you're going to just wear yourself out and all out climbing, which is my favorite thing to do. Keep your scan up. All the actions outside, other birds, clouds, gliders, dust, all the knowledge is outside. And no more than 10 seconds in the cockpit. Again, you should be having the instruments tell you or confirm to you what you're thinking, not the other way around. So why 45 degrees? This photo is out of Mifflin. It's pretty straightforward. Your average thermal is 3 to 8 seconds wide. And if you're doing this 20 degree thing, you're going to be outside of the thermal most of the time. Yeah, there's exceptions, but in general, 40 to 45 degrees is what you want. More than that, it's really hard to control the glider. Doesn't usually work. 30 is better, but you're still about 6 seconds straight line across. You're getting close. 30 is probably going to work. But if you're 45, you tend to be right. You can get yourself right centered up on the core. So in these times, there's not much soaring going on. To stay current, go out and do a ton of 40, 45 degree turns, 360s. If you can do those left and right a couple of times around, then try knocking the bank off by half, go halfway around and back to 45. And if you can do that with keeping your speed within a couple knots and that yaw string straight, you're in pretty good shape. If you can't do that, you're not going to thermal really good. No matter if the glider won't stay there.
Hey, Pete.
Yo.
Another thing and a tool, and this is kind of Williams specific, but also to name drop and add drop. What do you pay attention to circling time when you're talking about this? Because I never did until the Nationals, and Dennis broke my thermaling but made it better all in one day. About your 1 turn average on the ClearNav Vario, the bottom number that gives you a turn radius, and he said he got it from I believe Zimmerman, but he said that should be 19, 18 to 25 seconds, and it's much bigger than that. And it goes back to your 45 degree bank thing, and understand that, but to really turn that into cockpit data, if you're not like, well, am I steep enough? I don't know. The turn radius, the rate of turn is important, right? The
time for the turn.
The amount of time around the turn.
Yeah, it's a different way of saying what I just said, and it's whatever works for you. And it is one of the things I've noticed when I've flown with people with less, in their early soaring experience, is you tend to turn not tight enough. You think you're at 45 degrees, and you're kind of 20, and you can really see that when people are out climbing you.
Yeah. I just noticed that was an easy way to know, anyone who has a Vario that can click around like a ClearNav Vario with a color display, can see that very clearly and vividly in the nice display screen, right?
Yeah,
but
that's a good point.
But you know, I never used that number until 6 months ago, and it's even when I'm watching students, you can see how big that turn radius is, and tighten it up until, especially in a controlled fashion in the valley, how tight can you make it? How tight can you make that turn while still staying in control with good speed? You know, in a safe environment where you're not trying to tighten it up in the thermal for the first time and fly at a steeper bank than you're used to in rough mountain convergence.
Yeah. All those things are good, Ben. And more than 45, it's really hard to control your glider. And in general, it's not required. But 40 to 45 kind of takes care of most of, there's exceptions, but for 9% of flying you guys will do, that's all you need. Go practice steep turns. So when you get in the convergence, you can make it work. This photo here is Hobbs again. And if you count the gliders, there's a dozen gliders in that photo. Right at the top of the gaggle. So gaggle flying. Gaggle flying can be great because there's a lot of knowledge you can get, but you got to be a good citizen. As a good friend, Dennis says, you know, you're dancing with friends. You're not supposed to be in a knife fight. So first off, you got to engage with the gaggle. You can't just sit outside because in a lot of ways, that's even more dangerous and you're causing bad flow. So you know, it's kind of like getting on the freeway. When you first learn to drive in traffic, you got to learn how to drive and get yourself engaged without running into somebody. If anything you do that makes this other person change their course that are already established, then you're doing it wrong. You should be able to merge your way into the thermal. All your adjustments, please make them small. Otherwise, there's a good chance you're going to, again, make somebody do something drastic, which isn't the appropriate thing. Keep your traffic scan up. You'll think you know where people are, but you don't necessarily know. Keep looking around. Ideally, you want to get on opposite sides of the thermal if you can, but that's kind of hard to do, and you end up with more than 3 guys in the thermal. And sometimes you just got to fit in instead of stand out. Even though you want to be in a different place to climb better, you might have to wait. You may have to wait a few turns. You might have to wait the whole thermal. And if you end up in a thermal, it's misbehaved with people flying stupid, leave. It's just not good. The closing rates are a lot more hard than you think. Also, we tend to have a pretty big, diverse group of performance out here. And since the wing loading, some are very heavy and some are very light. So you got to try to fit in and not stand out. Be a good citizen. Okay, thermal soaring.
Hey, Pete, one more important thing.
Is
no matter who you're flying with, don't assume they see you. You know, because I think we have, especially here at Williams, we're fortunate to have some, you know, world-class pilots, and, you know, yourself included, Kemp with his big wing ship, you know, John Cocker, you can name some really big names. You're like, hey, these guys are great. They really know what they're doing. I'm just going to follow them. And you don't want to, you know, we all have to keep that situational awareness up. So don't let your guard down just because you're flying with really smart people. And then also, you know, think about where you are. Just because you can see them, they can't see you. That is very, very distracting. I've had people ride off my tail because they're like, hey, I'm going to follow you up in a thermal, and I can't see them, and I'm not paying attention to what I'm thermaling anymore, and we're flying crappy circles because I'm looking for you off my tail. And they're like, yeah, I see you. Well, that's cool. I'm glad you have eyes on me, but if I can't see you, I'm not comfortable, no matter who you are.
Shouldn't, you know, tucking in behind somebody, you shouldn't do unless you guys are both getting ready to leave. And you should really work hard to see opposites or let the other person see you. And then getting on the radio going, I'm behind you, isn't helpful to the rest of the world because the radio works for everybody. So, and as Ben said, never assume that the other guy sees you. You shouldn't assume he's going to run you over, but, you know, you shouldn't assume he sees you until a lot of times when I see somebody, I'll just wave at him in general or give him the 1-finger salute. So when you do that, you know, wave at him. Minimize the radio work until you absolutely have to talk on the radio. Remember, you're not the only person using the radio. Good point. Okay, so I think everybody knows what to do with this day. This is in the eastern side of New Mexico on the way home a few years ago. You know, kind of classic soaring day. Flat bottom cues, towering cues, a lot of choices, very well organized. It was a beautiful day. So there's nothing hard about that. But sometimes you get days like this. what do you do with the sky like this? This is in Poland. And these are the days where, you know, it's kind of all your ideas don't work so good because you can't, you know, the clouds aren't really well formed. They're kind of fuzzy. It's hazy. You can't see the shadows on the ground. So what do you do with this? Well, you should go flying first off. Don't not go fly because you can learn something. And second off, you're just trying to find the part of the cloud that has the best, you know, definition to it. And you might take 2-3 clouds to figure out what is the best definition. But the rules of thumb to start with, you know, it's been mentioned a couple of times. Ben mentioned it too, is that you want to start on the windward side of the cloud and preferably the sunny side of the cloud, and then work your way down the cloud trying to figure out where the lift is. And be patient. Sometimes there may be only be one knot in the sky, but it's better to be in the sky than on the ground. As a good friend used to say, keep it in the air and something good will happen. That's all I got to say about this mess. And it was a tough day. This is a really hard day. We got around though. Also, you want to keep your eyes wide open. This is Hobbs again. And you look at that cue, you go, oh, baby, isn't that great? And guess what? It was great. It was 10 knots great. But well, there's a little cloud there. Oops, sorry about that. And there's a little cloud here. So by sliding to the right a little bit in this picture, and then sliding back to the left to that great cloud, kept us in better air and kept us moving. We both saw this middle cloud and then went, oh, wait a minute. We should slide right about 20 degrees and slide back left. So eyes wide open, maximize the time in good air. That's what keeps you moving. That keeps you out of trouble. You really want to try to work. Ideally, you want to try to stay in the top third of the lift band of the day. And that'll keep the selection of thermals up. That'll keep the options to be good thermals. And it really keeps the heart rate down. Can't always do it, but that's kind of the goal. St. John's looking north, the wind. But if you go, why am I showing you this picture with fog? Here's the deal. This is what happens in the summer. You get an inversion where the fog is, so replace the fog with just the inversion. And this is why you never want to fall off the top of the hills. There's one exception. And the exception is if you see cues out there in the valley, then you can fall off the top of the hills, it'll work. If you don't see cues that are higher than the top of the hill, and good cues, don't fall off top of the hill, which means at times you have to be very patient. You might need to park somewhere and get your way back up to the working band altitude you like, and then move on. You might need to backtrack. But if you fall off the top on a day like this, which is most summer days in the middle of July and August, you're going to have a long glide of unhappiness to Willows or Williams or wherever you're gliding to. Okay. This is a Nephi looking south right over the airport. And this is kind of a classic, what do you see? So this is the audience participation time. Looking at the changing fabric, looking at the cloud shapes, looking at cloud shadows. Now, I came from the bottom left to the left side and worked my way from, the bottom right side of the picture, deep in the picture where the rain is, and worked my way up. So one of the things out there is the rain. What else of a note? What else is going to help you with this mess? Anybody? Silence falls.
There's not much wind judging by the tilt. There's a very light wind from the right, like you say, but you don't see much tilt in this unless it's stronger down lower is about how
yeah, there's not much tilt at all. And then you see cloud shadows and
but
also
the smoke in the lower right-hand corner of the picture looks like it's blowing to the right.
It could be. Yeah, it might have been. It was pretty light all the way back. So the couple keys, one's the winds from the right, and as Kim said, it's pretty light. The sun is to the right on the right side of the photo. So that means, you know, in this case, the right side of the photo, the right edge of the clouds is the place to start. There is a thunderstorm. There's a whole pile of thunderstorm action in the middle, deep, and moving to the right. And I'd come up along that shelf it was raining pretty good to the right of me as I was working my way north. So going north, glider pointed north. And then the thing is, if you notice the bottom, all these clouds are pretty good. They're pretty flat, a lot of good definition. But underneath them, you're trying to stay 500 or 1,000 feet below them, so you can see the texture changing and the movement of the clouds changing. It's very subtle. I fly Maui Jim sunglasses, a little polarization. You can see the fabric change, and you can wiggle and jiggle your way underneath the cloud working north. It makes a huge difference to keep up in the air, in the good air. I don't think I saw anything else besides the rain. And I got here early enough not to get rained on, which is always my goal, not to get rained on. All right, we're back home. Bear Valleys, straight ahead, slightly to the left. Indian Valley Reservoir to the right. Walker Ridge, straight ahead. Same kind of game we're playing. And this one's a little more closer to home with the same stuff. And one of the first things is a changing fabric. If you look right in the middle of the picture, right above the yaw string, you notice there's a little bit of rippleness, a little bit of flatness, texture. I don't remember where, but somewhere in this texture it was moving. And so I drove myself to that point to be able to make the jump, because as you look across after the cloud here, there's a bit of a gap until you get to the next cloud shadow north end of Walker Ridge. The other thing, what about the cloud shapes? Especially the next cloud right in the middle that the yaw string's pointed at. You notice on the west side again, where the yaw string tape thing is, that cloud looks pretty good, right? It's flat, dark, good edges, good form. But if you look at that cloud and start making your eye go to the left, you'll notice it all gets ripply and torn up and not so happy. That right edge is the place to be. And that right edge is kind of matches with the shadow, the cloud shadow that you see straight ahead right above the compass. So, the cloud shadows are guiding you to that good cloud. Then after that, it's the same game you play for the next clouds. And as I got to Walker, that good cloud, I bent to the left about, 45 degrees and followed the cloud shadows out to the southeast. So, my mind, those are the three questions I'm always asking as I'm running down a cloud street is, what's the fabric of the clouds? What the cloud shed show me? What's the shape? Where's the wind? Where's the sun? If in doubt.
Yeah, plus further towards Berryessa and also underneath the yaw string, but above Indian Valley Reservoir, it's got that spread out look. So even though that's not coming up in the very immediate term, it's just something to think about as you get down
there. The other thing, back to the bigger point Kemp's making, is you got to keep this mantra, I call it my story, running through my head to see how the sky is changing. Because over time, right now you might go, I want to go right to if you look at Bear Valley, you go straight down Bear Valley and there's always good queue. Well, that looks really good now. What's it going to look like 15 minutes when I'm there? And a lot of times there's 2-3 choices. And especially late in the day, you want to be on the west sunny side of most of these clouds to make it work. Of course, there's exceptions, but that's where I start my thinking. The west sunny side. The west sunny side. Then what are the fabric? What are the shadows? What are the shapes? As I work my way. I think it went all the way down to the bottom.
And Pete, ideally, you can't move it obviously, but if we could pull this picture back, 30 seconds to a minute as you're running down this cloud street, you have to decide how big is that gap that you're going to jump from. Basically, you're at, just past Indian Ranch down to Walker Ridge, but replace it with any place going down the Mendos. The S-turn or the switchbacks to Blackview, you have this gap. And you're going to have to decide, am I going to take a climb or am I willing to go off the edge of this cloud before I can glide? So do I need to slow down and transition and wiggle, hit something, make it work, and then jump? Or am I good to continue, or am I good to just glide this out and then can I get a climb over that next mountain? Right?
Yeah. The super important point Ben's making is that a lot of times a convergence on the Mendos will have a break like this. There'll be a little gap of 5 or 10 miles. This is probably a 5-mile gap. And so the technique here is that I'm almost high enough, but the thing is, if that cloud I'm looking at doesn't work, what's plan B, what's plan C? So again, it's hard to say because it doesn't look like, if you look at Walker Ridge, there's a good shadow. Halfway down, there's another shadow. Then all the way to the bottom, there's another shadow. You want to make sure that your aggressiveness doesn't get you disconnected from the lift. And this time could be, you can slow down and do an S turn, wiggle and jiggle through here, or you can maybe take a couple turns in it. I have no idea what I did, but there's places all up and down the Mendos, about every 10, 15 miles, you got to ask yourself that question. In general, it's better to take a couple turns in general, especially in your early days of running the Mendos. Down south on the VSA Ridge, a couple things. Wind and sun to the left, it's late in the day. The other thing is, if you notice, a lot of the Mendos have this kind of spread out ground thing. There's a peak in the middle of the picture here, right? But there's spread out to the left and to the right of it. It's not a really good peak. So you want to make sure, you don't want to get low, but if you do, you always want to make sure you can run to safety. And in general, that's to the east, in generally speaking. The other thing is, this whole Cloud Street, you look at this Cloud Street, looks pretty good all the way through the picture. I think I ran it all the way as far as it went up north, up beyond past Willows, I think. But the important thing here is you want to try to stay in the ideal lift band location, which is about 30% from your total depth of your lift band. And that way you'll have better thermal choices. You'll keep your stress down. And then if you do miss something, you're too aggressive, you'll still have time to fix it. It doesn't mean there's not lift all the way down on that ridge below us, because there is. But the question is, do you want to deal with that happy fun ball experience? Sometimes you have to, but a lot of times if you just slow down, take a few extra turns here or there, you don't. So top 30 if you make it work, but you don't want to force it if it's not working. But it's super important as you come to those transition points that Ben just talked about, you're high enough to make the jump so you don't get in difficulty on the other side. Sometimes you don't have a choice, but a lot of times you do. Probably 80% of the time you do. Sometimes you get days like this. It's like, ugh, what do I do with this? It's raining, it sucks. But the thing is, if I can get to that sun out there, which you can barely see, it'll work and I'll be happy again. If not, I'll land at the airport that's straight ahead, you can't see. This is at Hobbs. We got back up again. But, you know, a good friend used to say, keep it in the air and something good will happen. The key thing here too is, besides having sun and a place to land, is you want to slow down. You don't want to be barreling through it at 100 knots. Your glider doesn't work well with rain doing that. You know, like for example, the 24s, it doesn't make much sense to fly over 75 because your performance, you lose the polar, just goes out of bed. You turn into a space shuttle with wings. So just be.
If I had a jet engine,
well,
Ben,
then you'd be fine, but you don't. The other thing is, like I've been saying through this, and Ben has mentioned too, is that you need to have a plan. I always have a, ABC plan. I'm going to do this. I can do this. Oh, credit if I do that. And usually D is I'm into planning somewhere. But as one of our best pilots said, Dick Butler, hope is not a strategy. You cannot hope that it's all going to work out. As soon as you get in the hoping mode, you're in trouble. You're headed towards deep trouble. This is a Convergence out of Williams somewhere. I was chasing the Phoenix around long ago. But again, you can see little wispies on the bottom. And you got to decide, are those just wispies taking up space or are they really moving? If they're really moving, you're fine. In this case, they were. We were raging. This is a pretty fun day, actually. But the bottom line, you got to have a place to go. Always got to have a place to go. If you don't, and this is a place that your skill set can land at safely. Not my skill set, your skill set. This was in Tennessee during a contest, and I landed right before the thunderstorm hit, and there's like 8 of us here. It was pretty wet night. So always have a great place you can land that you truly believe in, not that you think it's going to work. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself in a world of hurt. Any questions? Got a little bit more, almost done. Any questions? Go. This is Concordia landing at Logan, Utah. Silence falls across the crowd. Anybody awake? All right, some training ideas. This is a glacier out in New Zealand. I forget the name of it, but it's really pretty. One, start your season with flight review. I did a few weeks ago, flying with Ben. It's a good way to keep you going when there's not much soaring around. And I strongly recommend, I move my flight review to the early in the year so I keep flying. And then the stuff we talked about before. Make sure you go fly in all conditions. Don't just wait for the great days, because we don't always have great days. And there might be some times where you never have a great day. There's pretty much, once we get a little bit deeper into the year, into March, from March to October, there's some kind of soaring at Williams pretty much every day. If not, go practice your turns. Fly one of the VSA courses, make you do something besides just thrashing around. You know, Ben now has created 15 to choose from for all shapes and sizes and experiences. And then review flights from some of the locals. Get a sense of what we do, why we do, and then ask us questions. I think most of us will be happy to talk to you about it. Now you're going, I need more knowledge. Of course you do. One, the Williams forum is moving to groups.io. There's information on Williams today. I think the new change is pretty cool, but that's where they're headed. So go get signed up. Two, if you don't already sign up for the Wings and Wheels newsletter, which is free, go sign up. There's a list of people that talk to you about things. G. Dale started, he wrote a column a few months ago. He's going to be writing a column. He also started a Hey G thing where you can ask him questions. I don't know how he's going to answer, but they're going to answer them in the column. And then Garrett and Adam are my other really favorite guys that write. So it's free. It comes out every couple of weeks. Also, they have their blog has backup to some of the columns, but now since they're not flying a lot, go read their stuff.
Hey, Pete.
Yes.
David said it was the Franz Josepher Glacier.
Okay, I'll buy it. It could be. Yeah, it's one of my favorite glaciers. You go by a lot. I forget the name of things. I haven't been there in a few years. Thank you, Joseph or David. G's got all these books. The first three came out of his lectures in New Zealand when he was coaching down there. I think they're great. And he just added a fourth, Airframes Avionics, which talks more about the mechanics of your glider and stuff like that. They're all, people haven't read them, they're all quick reads. They're all illustrated by G himself, and they're self-published by G himself. You know, it's $50, I think, which is about a 2,000-foot tow or whatever. I reread all of them right now to remind myself of things I keep forgetting. Wings and Wheels, but also I think Williams still has some copies on board. Also, G has updated his website. They did a huge makeover of the website lately. And he's also on Facebook, so you can get his ramblings there. And the last thing is, if you're not having fun, you're probably doing something wrong. And if it's not fun, then you probably need to go talk to somebody to see how to make it fun. Sometimes it's really difficult, but in general, if you're not having fun, something's wrong. This was taken in Florida a couple of years ago where I was going by somebody. That was pretty fun. We're drag racing down this cloud street. That's all I got. So thanks, you guys.
Good stuff, Pete.
Thanks.
Thanks, Pete.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Pete.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Pete. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pete.
Well, I hope everyone enjoyed the video, enjoyed some of the topics Pete talked about. If you didn't, I hope you enjoyed all the beautiful pictures of the clouds. If you have questions, always feel free to contact us at williamsoaring.com, info@williamsoaring.com. We'll get you email and in contact with any of us. And for all your soaring needs, visit williamsoaring.com. We can help you with anything that you like and need in the soaring world. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, stay tuned. There'll be more to come.